So we're standing here at Woodfield, which is Michael Collins' home place. A farm that was in the Collins' family for, some of the family say, about 6 generations. Certainly we have documentary evidence that probably about 5, so there's no real reason to dispute the 6. Late 18th century is kind of the first of the documentary evidence we have of the Collinses here. A guy called Morris swore an oath of loyalty to the king in the late 18th century, probably for enhanced tenancy rights. Lots of Catholics did that at the time. A guy called John then on a map of the Freak estate farmed 122 acres here just a little while after that. Probably relatives of the Collinses, certainly that John has been identified as his grandfather. The farm was subdivided, it would seem, over the next few generations, and obviously you had all of the land difficulties in Ireland at that time, in the early part even of the 19th century. So by Collins's youth, they were farming. It was a strange kind of a farm in some ways. It had been subdivided between their relatives. They were farming about 7 different plots of land in this town land, most of which were congregated in and around the house here, though not directly adjoining it. And a substantial plot then about a kilometre to the northeast of here. Indeed, when Collins's uncle Morris left it in his will, he referred to it as 2 farms. And Collins's uncle actually held the lease here for many, many years. He died a bachelor, he left it to Collins's father. It was quite a substantial farm. And they did quite well here, and the reason we know that is that even by 1899, Collins's father having died, his mother was building a large kind of 3 up, 2 down farmhouse, and in 1899 there weren't many of those around. They followed in the early decades of the 20th century, but I would say this was certainly one of the first. It was certainly one of the first in this town land. So she built that house in 1899, and even having built that, by 1907 when she died, she left £474 in her will. We think that the closest we can kind of guess at what that might be today using various index inflators, etc. I think maybe 65-70 grand was what she left, so that's a substantial amount of money. And Woodfield, by the time so Collins, as we know, moved on and moved out of it, and Johnny was left farming it here. And Johnny, by the time of the 1911 census, had a maid and a man working here. So there was a maid in the house and a man on the farm, common in farmers' houses of the time. Johnny himself was a highly political character. He's, I suppose, overshadowed by his brother substantially, but Johnny was active in the United Irish League. He was a huge supporter of William O'Brien. He was later active in the All for Ireland League. And even in the United Irish League, he contested an election at local level in 1902. Seems to have been quite a contentious election. He later complained that the Irish party hadn't given him a fair crack at the whip. Collins would have lived here at the time, so Collins grew up in the shadow of that election and in the shadow of some of Johnny's political activity. Johnny was also active on behalf of local tenants on several occasions, and indeed was also active on behalf of farm labourers. So it was a substantially political family. By 1917, Johnny had transferred his loyalty to Sinn Féin, in common with a lot of the nationalists of the time. And police at that stage in 1917, Michael having been involved in the rebellion, they were watching Johnny, they may have been watching him beforehand, and they referred to him and another man being quite ready to engage in murder, was the quotation from one of their reports. So Johnny was a marked man in his own right. He was also a member, or certainly somewhat active, with the local Ross company of the IRA. He later got a medal for his activity with them. So the house itself was burned, I suppose, after a substantial British campaign of arson. That campaign began, it operated unofficially throughout 1920. You'll have heard of things like the sack of Balbriggan, an unofficial kind of arson or vandalism by British forces. That happened in September 1920. But in December of 1920, martial law was declared, and that gave the British military authorities the right to inflict punishment, I suppose, under statute, the right to empower themselves under statute to inflict punishments like burning. That came in early December, and it may well have been part of the reason Cork was burned, because reports of it clearing the House of Commons were actually in the newspapers on the morning of the burning of Cork. Of course, the burning of Cork was in itself illegal because no military authority had yet been empowered, even though the statute had cleared Westminster. The first official British burnings came in Middleton in late December 1920, and they attacked and destroyed several houses in Middleton after an ambush there. And of course, when the British started burning, so did the IRA, and the IRA consequently cleaned out several big houses, or burned out big houses all over the place. And of course that was costing, in some ways the owners of those houses were being cost twice, because they owned some of the cottages that were being burned. So their own loyalist houses were being burned, and also some of their property that Republican tenants lived in, or civilian tenants lived in, were being burned as well. The house here was burned in response to, burnings were usually done as reprisals, and the house here was burned in response to a burning of, or to an attack on Rosscarbery police station by Tom Barry's flying column. The house was burned by the Essex Regiment, and Michael Collins himself later wrote a letter to Donal Hales, which leaves us quite a decent account of the burning of this house. Colonel Commandant Higginson, the commanding officer of a brigade at Cork City headquarters of the 6th Division, ordered the destruction as an official reprisal for the attack on Rosscarbery. It should be understood that my brother's place was 4 miles from Rosscarbery. The enemy force came, bringing with them several of the neighbouring civilians as hostages. Some of the civilians were forced at the point of the bayonet to bring hay and straw into the house. The hay and straw were then sprinkled with petrol, also forced. On the arrival of the English forces, the house was occupied by a maiden lady, a maid and 8 little children, ages from 12 years downwards to a child of less than 12 months. It should also be explained that quite a short time prior to the burning, the mother of the children had died. She had been in bad health for nearly 12 months, and no doubt a succession of raids by British forces contributed to hasten her untimely end. My brother, the father of all the children, was attending a county council meeting in Cork and was not present at the time of the burning. The little children were without anyone to protect them. The English forces proceeded to throw them out of the house, and having done this, proceeded with the burning. The dwelling itself and every out-office, with the exception of one stable, were completely destroyed. The hay shed, which contained some hay, was likewise destroyed. A farmhand was ploughing in a field near the house. The English forces went to the horses, took the harness off them, and threw it into the fire. The net result, therefore, was that the 8 young children were left homeless, and there was no person or nothing left to carry on the ordinary work of the farm. So that of course production suffered. To complete the story, my brother himself was arrested on his arrival at the railway station at Clonakilty. The timing of the arrest practically coincided with the burning of his house. He is at present at Spike Island, was visited on Friday last, and is likely to lose the use of his right hand as a result of medical neglect. The above are the details. There were in fact other minor points of brutality which cannot be told until all the evidence is available. The important thing is that the case is no exception. My brother was over military age, but he had always been an advanced Irishman. He was a member of Cork County Council. Being over military age, he devoted himself to this work and to general local reconstruction. Okay, so Johnny Collins remained on Spike Island until after the truce, and upon his release he never really settled here again. His wife had died in February, so he was, and his children had been sent out to various relatives. They had no home to live in here. 3 of them, for example, were with a sister in Cork. Johnny had been threatened by the Black and Tans here or by British forces here on a few occasions before the house was burned, and as the Civil War advanced he began to be threatened by the IRA, and all of that may have led to his decision to quit this place. He married Nancy O'Brien in 1922 in Wicklow. He actually used the address of Woodview on the marriage licence, which is interesting in itself that he wouldn't say Collins of Woodfield for whatever reason. Nancy O'Brien, of course, was an old, I suppose, agent of Michael Collins. She had worked in Dublin Castle. So Johnny, having married her, the couple settled in Dublin, and Johnny paid the final annuity on Woodview in 1923. I think it was December of 1923. And then in the early spring of 1924, this farm was sold off in several lots. One of the Collins relatives actually came to own a substantial part of it, so part of the farm remained in the extended family, if you like. And that was really the end of Michael Collins's immediate family's connection with Woodfield, until a nephew of his, Liam Collins, actually was involved in the restoration of this site as we see it now in the 80s and 90s.